Ma'am, you need to check that bag. It's too large for carry-on.
There must be some mistake. This bag is regulation size.
What would you do if the world told you to move, yet your dignity whispered to stay still? On a late-night flight bound for New York, one woman's quiet refusal set the skies on fire. Dr. Serena Caldwell, a successful CEO, sat silently in her assigned first-class seat, gripping a silver case that carried not only her professional mission, but the fragile hope of a child's life. But when flight attendants and officials insisted she give up her seat, she answered with just 6 words, "No, I will not move." That single moment ignited a storm. Passengers divided, tempers flared, and a live stream turned the standoff into a global spectacle. Was it about one seat on a plane, or was it about something deeper, something society has too often tried to silence? As the plane soared higher, so did the conflict, reaching all the way to the airline's headquarters and into the hearts of millions watching online. This was no longer just about travel, it was about truth. Stay with us as we unfold the powerful journey of dignity at 30,000 feet. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, because this is a story you won't want to miss. The late afternoon sun spilled gold across San Diego International Airport, painting long shadows over the glass windows of Terminal C. The air buzzed with the familiar hum of rolling suitcases, boarding announcements, and the restless shuffle of passengers eager to leave the ground. Dr. Serena Caldwell walked with measured steps, her sneakers whispering against the polished floor. She carried no designer luggage, no entourage, nothing that screamed influence. Instead, her only visible companion was a slim silver case cradled carefully in her hand. It looked ordinary to the untrained eye, but inside rested something extraordinary: preserved pediatric lung tissue, scheduled to arrive in New York for a life-saving transplant. Serena was used to traveling alone. She liked the anonymity of airports, where people moved in streams, each consumed by their own journey. But today, as she approached the first-class boarding lane of Continental Horizon Flight 714, she felt a flicker of unease. She adjusted her hoodie, tugged it over her braided hair, and let out a steadying breath. Airports had never been neutral ground for her. As a black woman, as someone who had been underestimated in every room she had entered, she knew how easily one could be reduced to a stereotype in spaces where judgment was quick and casual. Still, she walked forward. At the gate, Paula Grant glanced up from her scanner. Her smile froze, replaced by a pinched expression that seemed carved by habit rather than thought. She eyed Serena, then the silver case. "Economy line's over there," Paula said, nodding toward the crowded snake of passengers. Serena held her gaze, calm and steady. "First class," she replied softly, sliding her boarding pass across the counter. Paula frowned, her lips pressed into a thin line as the scanner chirped green. She hesitated, as though the machine itself had betrayed her expectations. For a moment, she looked ready to protest again, but something in Serena's eyes, a quiet, unyielding calm, made her step aside reluctantly. Serena thanked her, her voice barely above a whisper. She walked down the jet bridge, each step heavy with the memory of similar moments. She remembered being 25, told at a conference that the speaker badge she wore must have been a mistake. She remembered hotel lobbies where receptionists asked if she was in the right place. She remembered boardrooms where silence followed every idea she offered, until a white colleague repeated the same words minutes later, greeted by applause. The jet bridge smelled faintly of fuel and recirculated air. Serena breathed it in like incense, steadying herself. "Not today," she thought. "I will not let them take this moment from me." At the cabin door, Margaret Doyle stood like a gatekeeper in Navy uniform, her hair pulled into a severe bun. She gave Serena a once-over, her eyes catching on the hoodie. Then the case. "Excuse me," Margaret said. Her voice clipped. "Are you sure you're in the right cabin?" Serena paused. The words were polite in form, but sharp in tone. She felt the familiar sting beneath them, the unspoken doubt. People like you don't belong here. Her fingers tightened on the silver case. The tissue inside had less than 10 hours before viability began to decline. A child's life hung in the balance. "Yes," Serena said, her voice even, unshaken. She held up the boarding pass again. Seat 1A. Margaret's eyes flickered, but she didn't step aside. The pause stretched. Passengers behind Serena shifted impatiently, murmuring. One man sighed dramatically, muttering, "Come on. Some of us want to get home tonight." Inside, Serena felt the old battle, rising anger pushing against restraint. The urge to defend herself colliding with the knowledge that every word she spoke might be twisted against her. She thought of her father, a quiet pastor who taught her that dignity was not about what people gave you. It was about what you refused to surrender. So she did what he had taught her. She remained still. She let silence speak. Margaret huffed, finally scanning the pass. The machine chimed approval, again betraying the prejudice that lingered in human judgment. With a reluctant step, Margaret moved aside. Serena walked into the cabin, her posture straight, her heart steady. She placed the silver case gently beneath her seat in 1A, then settled into the leather cushion. From the window, she watched the ground crew move with practiced choreography. Fuel trucks hissed, luggage carts rattled, neon vests flickered in the fading light. Life outside seemed ordinary. Inside, tension coiled invisible threads around her chest. She touched the journal tucked into her bag. Its pages were filled with fragments, quotes, sketches, reminders. On the first page was a line she had written years ago. "Respect is the simplest technology. Anyone can use it, yet so many refuse." Her phone buzzed once. A reminder. She had scheduled it for this exact moment, anticipating the possibility that something might go wrong. She opened the message thread labeled Obsidian. Her thumb hovered, her heart wrestling with itself. She didn't want to use it. She never wanted to use it. But she knew the stakes. Her mind whispered, "Stay calm. Save it for when silence is no longer enough." The boarding continued around her. Passengers filled the cabin, business travelers with briefcases, vacationers in sandals, a teenage girl in oversized headphones. None of them noticed the quiet storm unfolding in the small space of seat 1A. Serena gazed out the window, her reflection staring back composed, weary, resolute. The hum of the aircraft vibrated beneath her feet, a steady reminder that soon they would rise into the sky. For now, she breathed. She had learned long ago that sometimes survival was not about fighting every battle. It was about choosing which ones would matter most. But deep inside, she knew this flight would not pass quietly. It had only just begun. The boarding process slowed to a crawl. The flow of passengers bottlenecked behind Dr. Serena Caldwell as Margaret Doyle, the senior flight attendant, continued to hover near the doorway with visible reluctance. The cabin air smelled faintly of citrus cleaner, mingled with the musk of leather seats and the metallic tang of recycled oxygen. Each sound seemed amplified, the beep of the scanner, the shuffle of impatient feet, the low grumbles of passengers. Serena kept her expression neutral. She had been here before, not in this exact place, but in the theater of assumption, where people cast her in roles she did not audition for. Too young, too black, too dressed down, too quiet. Never the right kind of traveler for a first-class seat. Margaret adjusted her scarf, her posture stiff with unspoken authority. "Ma'am, this is a premium cabin. Are you absolutely certain you're supposed to be here?" Her tone carried the polished politeness of someone who had spent years refining condescension into an art form. Serena offered no flare of outrage, no sharp retort. Instead, she reached into her bag and retrieved her boarding pass once more, holding it between two steady fingers. Her voice, calm but firm, cut through the tense silence. "Seat 1A. It's printed clearly. Would you like me to read it aloud?" A ripple of laughter broke from somewhere behind her, the sound of someone enjoying a scene they thought was harmless. But Serena felt the sting beneath her skin. She wanted to close her eyes, to step away from this moment that was all too familiar. Yet she did not. She remained rooted. Margaret glanced at the pass, then at Serena again, as though hoping the paper might transform into something that justified her suspicion. But the machine had already validated it. There was nothing left to question, except the fact that Margaret could not reconcile what she saw with what she believed. Finally, Margaret moved aside. Serena stepped past her into the aisle, her shoulders square, her steps measured. She placed the silver case gently beneath her seat and slid into the plush leather chair. The cushion molded to her frame, but her muscles did not relax. The cabin filled quickly. A man in an expensive suit took seat 2B, setting his briefcase down with a flourish. He gave Serena a sideways glance, his lips curving into a faint smirk. "Guess they're letting anyone up here these days," he muttered, not quite under his breath. Serena turned her head toward the window. She had learned the hard way that not every comment deserved her energy. Still, his words pressed against her chest, like an invisible weight. She closed her eyes briefly. In her mind, she heard her mother's voice, warm and unyielding. "You are not here to make them comfortable. Serena, you are here because you belong. Don't let their smallness shrink your space." Her phone buzzed once more in her pocket. She did not pull it out, but the vibration reminded her of the message thread waiting under the label Obsidian. One text, one gesture, and the airline's most lucrative medical transport contract would vanish. She hated that power and loved it at once. It was not a weapon she carried for vengeance, but for moments like this, when silence could no longer shield her from harm. For now, she resisted. Margaret continued her rounds, greeting passengers with forced brightness. When she reached row 2, she leaned toward the man in the suit. Can I get you settled? Sir, anything you need before takeoff." Her voice was honey. The contrast was not lost on Serena. She wondered if Margaret even noticed how sharply her tone shifted depending on who stood before her. As the last passengers boarded, the purser made an announcement about an on-time departure. The overhead bins clicked shut, and the hum of engines vibrated faintly beneath the floor. Serena adjusted her seatbelt, her eyes drifting once more to the silver case at her feet. Inside was a fragment of hope, for a little girl she had never met. Lily Hammond, 9 years old, her lungs failing faster than doctors could predict. Serena had promised the surgical team in New York that the tissue would arrive tonight. There was no margin for error, no room for delay. Her stomach tightened. The irony cut deep while she was fighting for dignity in seat 1A. A child's life depended on her restraint. If she escalated now, the delay could cost hours. If she remained silent, she risked something else, the erosion of her own humanity. A flight attendant's hand brushed against her shoulder. Serena looked up to find Margaret leaning closer again. "Ma'am, I'll need to see your ID this time. Airline security protocols." Serena inhaled sharply. She knew this dance. The shifting goalposts, the moving standards, the sudden invocation of rules no one else was asked to follow. She looked around the cabin. None of the other passengers were being asked to present identification again. Her fingers itched toward her bag, but she stopped herself. She met Margaret's gaze with a steady calm. "You've scanned my boarding pass twice. The system confirmed my seat. If you'd like to ask the gentleman in 2B for his ID, I'll be happy to show you mine as well." A hush fell over the rows. The man in 2B shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his tie. Margaret's jaw clenched. For a moment, it seemed she might argue again. But something in Serena's tone, the clarity, the refusal to bend forced her to retreat. She straightened, smoothed her uniform, and moved on. Serena exhaled slowly, her pulse still elevated. She thought of sending the message now. Her thumb hovered near her phone, but she stopped. "Not yet," she told herself. "Not until they leave me no choice." As the plane prepared for pushback, the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Ethan Walker. We're cleared for departure. Estimated flight time 4 hours and 30 minutes. Please fasten your seatbelts." The engines roared louder, a thunder rising from beneath the wings. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, casting the passengers in a warm glow. Serena looked out the window, watching the tarmac blur with motion. But then, without warning, the engines powered down. A ripple of confusion swept the cabin. Passengers murmured, craning their necks to peer down the aisle. The man in 2B groaned, muttering about missed meetings. Serena's heartbeat quickened. Something was wrong. She reached for her phone, her hand trembling slightly. She opened the Obsidian thread, her thumb hovering over the word she had drafted weeks ago. 5 words. That was all it would take. 5 words that would send shockwaves from this cabin to the airline's glass towers in Dallas. Her breath caught in her throat. The choice loomed before her, sharp and unavoidable. She closed her eyes, steadying herself against the storm building around her. If silence fails, she thought, then power will speak. The cabin hummed with restless energy. Passengers shifted in their seats. Whispered questions darted back and forth, and the soft whir of the ventilation system did little to ease the mounting tension. The engines had gone quiet again, and in that sudden silence, even the smallest sound seemed to carry the weight of anticipation. "Doctor," Serena Caldwell sat motionless in seat 1A, her hands resting on her lap. Her eyes flicked once more to the silver case beneath her seat. It remained secure, its polished surface reflecting the dimmed cabin lights. Inside lay the future of a child who had no idea of the drama unfolding thousands of miles away from her hospital bed. Serena closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. Her phone vibrated gently in her pocket. She pulled it out, the screen glowing softly in the dim cabin. The Obsidian thread was open. 5 words stared back at her, already typed weeks ago, prepared for this very kind of moment. She hesitated, her thumb hovering. Her heartbeat pulsed in her ears. Then, with a breath that trembled yet resolved, she pressed send. The message shot into the digital ether, quiet and invisible. No one around her noticed, but far away, the consequences unfurled like a storm cloud ripping across a summer sky. At Continental Horizon's headquarters in Dallas, A string of alerts lit up the operations floor. The Obsidian protocol had been triggered. Monitors that normally displayed flight statistics and weather updates suddenly turned red with flashing warnings. Analysts rushed from desk to desk, their eyes wide. In a corner office, CFO Daniel Mercer dropped his coffee when his phone lit up with a Priority 1 alert. The liquid splattered across his desk, staining paperwork, but he hardly noticed. He snatched up the phone, his voice cracking as he barked into the line. "Tell me this isn't real. Tell me she didn't activate it." The answer was silence, followed by the unmistakable ping of confirmation. Obsidian was live. Across the executive suite, CEO Jonathan Pierce was in the middle of a video call with investors. Charts and graphs glowed on the wall behind him, showing quarterly growth projections. His polished voice carried the ease of someone used to control. That ease vanished the moment his assistant burst in, face pale. "Sir," she whispered, thrusting a tablet in front of him. "Protocol Obsidian. Doctor, Caldwell has triggered it." Pierce froze. His investors watched in confusion as the color drained from his face. He excused himself abruptly, ending the call without explanation. For a man who thrived on commanding attention, the sudden silence in his office was deafening. The protocol was not a simple warning. It was a contractually binding failsafe. Years ago, Serena's company had entered into an exclusive partnership with the airline, entrusting them with the transport of sensitive biomedical cargo. In exchange, Serena's firm guaranteed billions in revenue. But she had negotiated a clause, quiet and rarely acknowledged, granting her the power to suspend the partnership instantly in cases of confirmed discrimination or mistreatment. That clause had just been invoked. Within minutes, ground staff across the network received orders to halt all biomedical cargo scheduled under Serena's contracts. Shipments that supported research labs, hospitals, and urgent transplant surgeries suddenly froze in place. The ripple hit like an earthquake. In Dallas, executives scrambled to contain the fallout. Phones rang in unison, the chorus of panic echoing through glass corridors. Lawyers demanded immediate clarification. Public relations officers drafted statements that were rejected as quickly as they were written. The numbers coming in were staggering within an hour. The projected financial loss neared hundreds of millions. Back in the cabin of Flight 714, passengers remained unaware of the chaos spreading across the airline's empire. They only knew the engines had stopped, the takeoff delayed without explanation. A murmur swelled, fueled by impatience. "What's going on?" a woman in row 3 asked loudly. "We should be in the air by now." The man in 2B tapped his watch dramatically. "Unbelievable. First she holds us up. Now this." He threw Serena a pointed glance, his voice pitched so others could hear. Serena did not react. She stared out the window, her face a mask of calm. But inside, her chest burned. Every instinct screamed at her to defend herself, to confront the injustice directly. Yet she reminded herself of the promise she had made never to let their noise drown her purpose. A flight attendant whispered hurriedly to Margaret Doyle near the galley. Margaret's lips tightened as she glanced toward Serena. Suspicion etched into her features. She could not know what Serena had done with a single press of her thumb. She only sensed that something about this passenger carried weight beyond her expectations. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a brief operational delay. Please remain seated, and we'll provide updates shortly." The words were vague, corporate sanitized. They revealed nothing, but Serena knew their true meaning. The plane could not leave until headquarters regained its footing, and headquarters had no footing left to stand on. Far above the airport, the sky glowed with streaks of fading sunlight. Planes roared into the distance, climbing toward horizons unbroken. But Flight 714 remained grounded, tethered by something far greater than mechanical trouble. Serena leaned back into her seat, her fingers resting on her journal. She opened it to a page marked with a ribbon. The words stared back at her, written in her own looping hand. Respect is the simplest technology. Anyone can use it, yet so many refuse. She traced the letters with her fingertip, her thoughts turning inward. Anger tugged at her ribs, heavy and sharp. Part of her wanted to stand, to declare to every soul on this plane exactly who she was and why their assumptions could not confine her. Another part urged restraint, whispering that silence could be its own form of thunder. Her phone vibrated again. This time, it was a secure reply from her operations team. A single sentence. Confirmed Obsidian engaged. Network suspension live. Serena closed her eyes. She thought of Lily Hammond lying in a hospital bed, waiting. She thought of the surgeons in New York checking their watches, praying the transplant tissue arrived intact. She thought of every child, every patient, every parent who had ever needed dignity as much as medicine. The cabin around her blurred. The murmurs, the frustration, the sideways glances, they were all part of the same noise she had learned to rise above. Her focus remained sharp on the truth sometimes. The most powerful gestures were not loud. They were silent, deliberate, unstoppable. Outside the aircraft, ground crew conferred in hurried tones. Word had reached them that the flight might not leave at all until the crisis at headquarters resolved. A chain of decisions, each more desperate than the last, began to spool from Dallas to San Diego. Executives called regulators. Regulators called lawyers. Lawyers called back with answers no one wanted to hear. And all of it began with one woman sitting quietly in seat 1A, her silver case glowing faintly at her feet. The engine stirred again, coughing once before falling silent. Passengers groaned, voices rising. The man in 2B slammed his hand on the armrest. This is ridiculous. Somebody needs to get control of this plane. Serena's eyes flicked toward him. Her lips parted, but she stopped herself. Instead, she whispered a thought so soft it barely reached her own ears. Control is not the same as power. The words steadied her. She knew the storm had only just begun. The announcement of an operational delay did little to quiet the passengers. Restless energy spread through the cabin like static electricity. People tapped on their phones, sent frustrated texts, and complained in low voices that grew louder with every passing minute. Dr. Serena Caldwell sat unmoving in seat 1A. She kept her breathing steady, though her pulse raced. The silver case at her feet seemed to hum with invisible urgency, as though it too sensed the ticking clock. Somewhere in New York, a team of surgeons was preparing a sterile room, waiting for its arrival. Every second mattered. Margaret Doyle, the senior flight attendant, returned to the front of the cabin with brisk steps. She whispered to another crew member, her voice sharp, her eyes flicking toward Serena. The other attendant glanced uneasily in the same direction before disappearing into the galley. A few minutes later, Captain Ethan Walker stepped out of the cockpit. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair and a face marked by years of flying. His presence quieted the murmurs for a moment. Passengers recognized authority when they saw it. Captain Walker spoke softly to Margaret, but Serena could still hear fragments. Delay. Headquarters. Clarification. The words were muffled by the cabin noise, but the tension in his voice was clear. Margaret folded her arms. "She's the problem," she hissed, her eyes narrowing on Serena. "She should be moved. It will make everything easier. The captain frowned. We don't remove passengers without reason. She doesn't belong in first class. Margaret snapped quietly. I can feel it. Serena's jaw tightened. She lowered her gaze to the journal in her lap, pretending to read, but her ears caught every word. Captain Walker rubbed his forehead. He looked toward Serena, his expression less hostile than Margaret's but tinged with hesitation. Finally, he approached her seat. Ma'am, he said with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. May I see your boarding pass again? Serena lifted her gaze. Her eyes were calm, unwavering. You have already scanned it multiple times, she said evenly. But of course, she handed it to him without protest. The captain glanced at the pass, then at her, as if expecting the ink to rearrange itself into something else. It did not. It still read Seat 1A. He returned it with a nod. Thank you. As he walked back toward the cockpit, Margaret intercepted him. You see, this is what I mean. She's hiding something. Look at the way she carries herself. Captain Walker lowered his voice, but Serena still caught the edge of his frustration. What she carries herself like is calm. You might try the same. Margaret's lips tightened into a thin line. She turned away, but not before Serena saw the flash of anger in her eyes. The engines rumbled faintly, then stilled once more. A groan rose from the passengers. This is insane, muttered the man in 2B. He twisted in his seat, addressing Serena directly now. You know, some of us have actual work to do. Maybe if you just cooperated, we'd already be in the air. Serena's head turned slowly. She met his gaze without blinking. Her voice was low, but it carried the weight of steel. Perhaps the problem isn't me. Perhaps the problem is the assumptions you're making. The man opened his mouth to retort, but her steady stare silenced him. He looked away, muttering under his breath. Inside, Serena's emotions surged. Part of her longed to unleash every ounce of anger she felt, to tell them who she was, what power she held, how fragile their world truly was compared to the storm she could summon. But another part of her, deeper and wiser, reminded her that power was not about volume. It was about timing. Her phone buzzed with another secure message. A single line from her operations team appeared on the screen. Headquarters in crisis. Board called emergency meeting. Serena closed her eyes briefly. She pictured Jonathan Pierce, the airline's CEO, pacing in his office, sweat beating at his temples. She imagined the investors demanding answers, the lawyers flipping through contracts they never thought would matter. All of it spinning out from this quiet cabin, from her stillness in 1A. Margaret returned, her step sharper now. She stopped beside Serena, lowering her voice but not her hostility. Listen, she said. If you move to economy, we can take off. Everyone will thank you. Isn't that more important than making a scene? Serena lifted her chin, a scene she repeated, her voice soft but edged with iron. You mean sitting in the seat I paid for? Margaret flushed. Don't twist my words. Serena leaned forward slightly, her tone still calm. The only words twisting here are the ones you're using to disguise prejudice as procedure, for a heartbeat. Margaret looked as if she might lash out. Then she spun on her heel and strode back toward the galley. Passengers murmured again, whispers spreading like fire. Some sided with Margaret, grumbling about delays. Others exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that something deeper was unfolding. Serena felt the weight of every eye on her. She opened her journal again, letting her pen scratch across the page. Her handwriting flowed with quiet determination. Dignity is oxygen, she wrote. Without it, we suffocate. With it, we rise. She paused, the words vibrating through her chest. She thought of her father's sermons, his insistence that dignity was not negotiable. She thought of her mother's gentle reminders that silence could be stronger than thunder. Her heart wrestled between fury and restraint. Fury wanted her to stand and speak her truth now. Restraint urged her to wait, to let the system reveal its cracks under its own weight. She pressed the pen harder into the paper, the ink deepening. Outside, the sky turned a darker shade of violet as evening crept closer. The airport lights flickered on, illuminating the tarmac in golden halos. Ground crew waved signals to one another, their movements brisk, almost frantic. The intercom clicked again. This time, Captain Walker's voice carried more strain. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We're working with operations to resolve a technical issue. Please remain seated. A technical issue. Serena almost smiled. She knew better. The issue was not mechanical. It was moral. She closed her journal, sliding it back into her bag. Her hand brushed against her phone, where the Obsidian thread still glowed. She had already triggered it. The storm was spreading. Now. All she had to do was hold her ground. Margaret reappeared once more, her eyes sharp, her voice clipped. Ma'am, this is your final chance to avoid further complications. Will you move to another seat? Serena's pulse thundered, but her face remained serene. She looked up, meeting Margaret's stare with quiet fire. No, I will not move. The words rang through the cabin, low but resonant. Silence followed, broken only by the whir of the air system. Even the man in 2B said nothing this time. Captain Walker appeared at the front again, drawn by the tension. He looked between Margaret and Serena, his jaw tight. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he lifted his hand, signaling Margaret to step aside. The engines rumbled once more, a deep growl rising from beneath the floor. The cabin lights flickered. Passengers clapped softly, relieved that the flight might finally depart. But Serena knew better. This was not the end of the conflict. It was only the beginning. As the engines surged, her heart whispered the truth she already knew. The storm was coming, and when it broke, nothing about this airline would remain untouched. The hum of the engines grew steady again, but the tension in the cabin did not ease. Passengers clutched phones, checked watches, sighed into the recycled air as though impatience itself could push the plane forward. The air felt heavy, layered with frustration, and the unspoken question no one dared to ask. Why had this simple flight become so complicated? Dr. Serena Caldwell sat still in seat 1A, her hands folded loosely over her journal. She had spoken her refusal, clear and calm, and the echo of those words still lingered in her chest. No, I will not move. They were not words of defiance for the sake of pride, but of truth, spoken from a place deeper than anger. She glanced at the silver case by her feet, the case that carried far more than tissue. It carried hope, urgency, and the silent plea of a child's lungs failing one fragile breath at a time. Serena had promised to guard it, and she had promised herself something else, never to bow to indignity, not even in the face of pressure disguised as courtesy. Up front, Margaret Doyle hovered near the galley, her posture rigid, her face, framed by a tight bun, betrayed frustration that she could no longer mask. She spoke in low tones to a junior flight attendant. She is disrupting everything. The captain should never have let her stay. The younger attendant shifted uncomfortably, but her pass checked out. Twice. We cannot remove her for nothing. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Sometimes the rules are not enough. Sometimes you know just by looking. The words floated through the air, reaching Serena's ears. She closed her eyes, the weight of familiarity pressing against her chest. She had heard those words before, in different forms, in classrooms, in offices, in restaurants. You just know. You do not belong. Not here. Her pen slipped into her hand again, the journal opening almost on its own. She wrote quietly, each word grounding her. Prejudice wears many faces. Some wear uniforms. Some wear smiles. But the mask always slips. Outside the aircraft, the night deepened. The runway lights glowed like constellations stitched into the earth. Fuel trucks rolled past. Yet inside, time stretched thin, each minute filled with the taut silence of anticipation. In Dallas, the silence was broken by chaos. The headquarters of Continental Horizon Airlines had descended into emergency mode. Jonathan Pierce, the CEO, sat at the head of a long mahogany table in the executive boardroom, his jaw tight. Around him, executives barked into phones. Lawyers pored over contracts. Analysts stared at graphs turning red. "This cannot be happening," Pierce muttered, slamming a fist onto the polished surface. Obsidian was supposed to be symbolic. She was never meant to use it. CFO Daniel Mercer wiped sweat from his brow. Symbolic or not, the clause is ironclad. The contracts are suspended until she retracts. We are bleeding money by the minute. Cargo is stuck. Hospitals are calling. Regulators want answers. Pierce glared. Then get her to retract it. Now. How Mercer demanded. She is sitting in seat 1A on Flight 714, and from what I hear, she is not in the mood to negotiate. Pierce rubbed his temples, the weight of the moment pressing in. He had underestimated her, underestimated the quiet steel that defined Serena Caldwell. To him, she had always been a useful partner, a visionary scientist whose innovations made the airline money. He had never imagined she would wield her leverage with such precision. Back on the plane, Serena felt the ripple of what she had set in motion. She could not see the executives scrambling in their glass towers, but she sensed it. Power had shifted, not through shouting or threats, but through the silent activation of a promise written into ink years ago. The man in 2B broke the quiet with a groan. This is absurd. They should just move her. Why are we all suffering because of one person? Several passengers murmured in agreement, but a woman across the aisle leaned forward, her voice gentle yet firm. Maybe she is not the problem. Maybe the problem is that you think her presence here is abnormal. The man blinked, startled. His lips parted to argue, but the woman's gaze was steady. Slowly, he leaned back, silent for the first time since boarding. Serena turned slightly, her eyes meeting the woman's. She saw quiet solidarity there, a reminder that not all voices joined the chorus of dismissal. She nodded once, gratitude unspoken but understood. Her phone buzzed again. A new message from her operations director appeared. Board has ordered CEO to contact you directly. Prepare. Serena exhaled slowly. She imagined Pierce pacing in his office, preparing the words he never thought he would have to say. Apologies born not from remorse, but from necessity. She had seen this before. The higher the title, the harder it was to admit fault. Yet the fall was always the same. Margaret returned, her steps quick, her expression strained. She stopped at Serena's row once more, her voice hushed but sharp. This situation has gone too far. The captain may be forced to remove you. Serena looked up, her voice calm. On what grounds Margaret hesitated, the question exposing the hollowness of her threat. On grounds of disruption. Serena's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. I am not disrupting. I am sitting, quietly, in my assigned seat. The disruption is not mine. Margaret's cheeks flushed. Her mask, the polished professionalism she wore like armor, cracked for an instant. You think you are untouchable? She spat in a whisper. Serena tilted her head. No, I think dignity should be untouchable. The words landed between them with the weight of stone. Margaret opened her mouth, then closed it again, retreating toward the galley without another word. The cabin buzzed with whispers. Passengers leaned toward each other, speculating, interpreting, but Serena tuned it out. She reached for her journal again, her pen moving with steady rhythm. Mass fall when pressure rises. What remains is truth. Her chest ached with the weight of it all. The anger pressing against her ribs, the fatigue of always having to prove her presence valid, the quiet ache of knowing a child's life waited on her strength. For a moment, she wished she could simply be invisible, just another passenger, unremarkable and unquestioned. But that was not her reality. Her reality demanded composure, demanded resilience, demanded the choice to stand even when sitting still. At headquarters, Jonathan Pierce finally dialed the number he had avoided for years. The line rang once, twice, before connecting. His voice, polished and practiced, carried into the quiet cabin of Flight 714. Dr. Caldwell, he began, his tone strained with forced calm. This is Jonathan Pierce. I believe we need to talk. Serena's lips pressed together. The storm had breached the cabin walls. The masks were off now. It was time for truth. The cabin had settled into a restless quiet, the kind of silence that comes not from peace, but from exhaustion. Passengers were slumped in their seats, scrolling through phones, muttering under their breath, waiting for something to change. The engines hummed faintly, but the plane remained tethered to the gate, a giant bird unwilling to take flight. Dr. Serena Caldwell sat in 1A, her posture still, her presence calm, though her heart carried the weight of storms. She had spoken to Jonathan Pierce only minutes ago, his strained voice dripping with the desperation of a man used to control, but suddenly stripped of it. She had said little in return, only that she expected the dignity her ticket had promised. She ended the call without ceremony. The silence afterward felt heavier than his words. In row 7, Isabella Cruz adjusted her phone on the tray table. A freelance journalist and avid live streamer, she had sensed from the start that something unusual was brewing on this flight. She had noticed the tense exchanges at the boarding gate, the whispers between attendants, the uneasy glances cast toward the woman in 1A. Now, with the delay stretching longer, her instincts sharpened. She pressed record. The live stream flickered to life, the comments feed already bubbling. Isabella spoke in a hushed tone, the hum of the cabin filling the background. Flight 714 is stuck on the ground. Something is happening with a passenger in first class. You all know me, I don't jump into drama unless it matters. But what I'm seeing here feels different, feels wrong. Her camera angled discreetly toward the front. The viewers caught a glimpse of Serena, calm and composed, her face half lit by the cabin lights. To Isabella's audience, the image told its own story. A woman sitting in her rightful seat, carrying herself with quiet dignity, surrounded by tension that seemed to orbit her like a storm cloud. The comments exploded. What's going on? Why are they not taking off? Is this discrimination? Stay live. Isabella, don't stop. Margaret Doyle moved through the cabin once more, her eyes sharp. She stopped briefly at Serena's row, speaking in low tones that the camera could not catch. But Isabella's microphone picked up Serena's response. Clear, steady. No, I will not move. The words, simple and calm, spread instantly across the live stream. Clips circulated within minutes, shared and reshared. The phrase taking root as a declaration larger than the moment itself. Back at headquarters, Jonathan Pierce's phone lit up with notifications. News outlets were already calling. His assistant burst into the boardroom, a tablet in hand. It's gone viral. Sir, there's a live stream. Hashtags are trending. Pierce snatched the device, his stomach tightening as he read the headlines flashing across the screen. Continental Horizon accused of racial profiling. Black CEO told to move from first class. Passenger refuses to budge. His polished empire was crumbling in real time. The internet fanning the flames faster than any press release could smother them. On the plane, Isabella's audience swelled into the tens of thousands, then hundreds. Viewers demanded justice. Others flooded the airline's official accounts with messages. Still others began digging into who Serena was. Within the hour, Serena's name trended worldwide. She noticed the shift as whispers spread through the cabin. A young man 2 rows back leaned toward his seatmate, whispering, I think she's someone important. Look, people online are saying she runs a biotech company. The murmurs grew. Some passengers looked at Serena with new eyes, curiosity replacing suspicion. Others looked unsettled, realizing they might be witnesses to a story far larger than a delayed flight. Serena kept her gaze fixed on the journal in her lap. She wrote slowly, her pen steady. Truth has a way of escaping. Even when you sit in silence, it finds a microphone. She closed the book and exhaled. She had never wanted spectacle. Her fight was not for attention, but for principle. Yet she also knew the stories, once unleashed, no longer belonged only to the teller. They belonged to everyone who saw themselves within them. Margaret noticed the shift too. Her eyes darted nervously toward the passengers filming, toward Isabella's phone capturing everything. Her polished mask cracked further, frustration edging into panic. She disappeared into the galley, whispering furiously to another attendant. Captain Walker emerged from the cockpit, his brow furrowed. He had seen the same updates now flooding the crew's devices. He approached Serena quietly, crouching beside her seat so his words would not carry. Dr. Caldwell, he said, his voice low. Headquarters is in chaos. Your message. It has reached the world. I need to know if there is a way forward here. For the sake of everyone on board. Serena studied him, her expression unreadable. The way forward is simple. Captain, respect, nothing less. He held her gaze for a moment, then nodded slowly. Understood. For the first time that evening, Serena sensed sincerity in his voice. Perhaps the storm was finally cracking open space for truth. The plane remained grounded, but inside, something had shifted. Passengers were no longer simply restless travelers. They were witnesses, participants, amplifiers. The delay was no longer an inconvenience, it was a reckoning. Serena leaned back in her seat, her eyes drifting to the darkened window. Her reflection stared back at her, layered over the lights of the runway. She whispered to herself, barely audible, it was never about the seat. It was always about the silence. Her phone buzzed again. Another secure message from her operations team appeared. Media requests pouring in. Public support growing. Hold steady. She smiled faintly. though her heart still carried the weight of urgency. Lily Hammond's fragile hope still depended on this journey. Serena closed her eyes, praying silently that the case at her feet would reach its destination in time. Across the aisle, Isabella adjusted her camera, her voice steady but charged. "To everyone watching," she said, "this is not just about one woman on one plane. This is about what we all allow, what we accept as normal. Tonight, you're seeing someone refuse to shrink. Remember her words. No, I will not move." The comments poured in, flooding with hearts, fists raised, declarations of solidarity. Serena did not look up, but she felt the tide turning. A story that began with humiliation was now carried on wings stronger than prejudice could bind. Outside, the engine stirred once more. The ground crew prepared for another attempt at departure. But Serena knew the real journey had already begun, one that stretched far beyond the runway. She rested her hand lightly on the silver case. For Lily, for dignity, for everyone who had ever been told they did not belong. The world was watching now, and the silence had become thunder. At 30,000 feet, the sky is silent, but on the ground silence is a fragile thing. In Dallas, silence had already broken. Continental Horizon's headquarters pulsed with chaos. Phones rang without pause. Email servers groaned under the weight of incoming complaints. And the corporate social media team was drowning in a storm that grew fiercer with every passing second. In the executive boardroom, Jonathan Pierce gripped the edge of the table as though force alone could hold back the flood. Screens lining the walls displayed headlines that multiplied faster than he could read them. Continental Horizon accused of discrimination. Passengers' refusal sparks outrage. Viral livestream shows tense standoff. His assistant hurried in, her face pale. "Sir, it's not just trending, it's everywhere. Politicians are commenting. Celebrities are retweeting Isabella Cruz's stream. They are calling it a movement." Pierce's jaw tightened. "We are an airline, not a political stage." The CFO shot him a look. "Tell that to the markets. Our stock is tanking. We have lost $400 million in valuation in under 2 hours." The words hung in the air, heavy as lead. For the first time in his career, Pierce felt the ground tilt beneath him. He was used to storms, but this one was not about numbers. It was about dignity, and that fight had no quick fixes. Back in the cabin of Flight 714, the air buzzed with unease. Passengers scrolled through their phones, some watching Isabella's stream, others reading the flood of news. Every minute stretched into an hour. "Oh, Doctor?" Serena Caldwell remained still in her seat. She had not asked for this attention, yet the storm had found her. She turned a page in her journal and wrote a single line. "Systems unravel when truth is louder than control." Her hand trembled slightly as she set the pen down. She thought of Lily Hammond again, the fragile 9-year-old waiting in New York. She imagined the girl's small chest rising and falling with labored effort. The transplant tissue in the silver case at her feet could buy her another chance at life. Every delay felt like a betrayal. Her phone buzzed once more. The message was short. "Hospitals calling. Pressure on airline immense. Hold steady." She closed her eyes. Holding steady was harder than it sounded. Inside, she fought battles no one could see. One voice urged her to speak, to rise and claim the authority she had every right to wield. Another whispered restraint, reminding her that anger, once unleashed, could consume even the just. The man in 2B sighed loudly, shifting in his seat. "This is what happens when people make everything about themselves," he muttered. His words were sharp enough for Serena to hear. Before she could respond, A different voice rose from the back. A young woman with braided hair spoke up, her voice carrying clearly. No. This is what happens when people in power think they can decide who belongs. Maybe it is time someone said no. The cabin stilled. Serena turned slightly, meeting the woman's eyes. She offered a small nod, gratitude glowing quietly between them. For the first time since boarding, she felt less alone. Margaret Doyle appeared once again, her face lined with fatigue and frustration. She leaned toward Serena, her words clipped. Dr. Caldwell, headquarters has asked me to ensure your cooperation. If you agree to move, this can all be over. Serena looked up, her gaze calm but unwavering. Over. You think humiliation ends when I surrender? No. It only deepens. Margaret's jaw tightened. You are risking this entire flight. Serena's voice softened, but her words cut clean. I am not the one creating risk. I am the one refusing to carry your burden of prejudice. The exchange carried through the cabin, passengers leaning closer, some recording on their phones. Margaret flushed under the weight of so many eyes. For the first time, it was not Serena under scrutiny, but her. She turned sharply and disappeared into the galley. Captain Ethan Walker stepped out moments later. His face was grave, his voice steady. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are awaiting clearance from headquarters to proceed. I understand this delay has been difficult, but we ask for calm. He glanced briefly at Serena, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. She saw something shifting there, a quiet recognition of the truth that had been denied too long. Back in Dallas, the unraveling accelerated. Investors threatened to pull out. Regulators demanded hearings. Hospitals begged for the release of biomedical shipments. Jonathan Pierce stood at the center of it all, his polished composure crumbling. He had built an empire on efficiency and image, yet in a single evening it was collapsing under the weight of arrogance. Pierce stared at the contracts spread across the table, his reflection warped in the glossy surface. He whispered to himself, almost a confession. She warned us. She said respect was not optional. No one responded. The truth required no echo. On the plane, Isabella Cruz adjusted her phone once more, her voice steady as she spoke to her swelling audience. You're all watching this in real time. Remember, this is not about inconvenience. This is about dignity, about whether we allow someone to be told they do not belong because of how they look. The comments flooded faster than she could read them. Messages of solidarity, stories of similar experiences, outrage at the airline. Serena did not watch, but she felt the tide rising around her. Her journal lay open again, and she wrote quietly. Unraveling is painful, but it is also necessary. Systems must fall apart before they can be rebuilt. She set the pen down and looked out the window. The runway lights glowed like a path waiting to be taken. She thought of Lily, of the surgeons in New York, of every person who had ever felt the sting of dismissal. This was larger than her seat, larger even than the contract. This was a moment that demanded endurance. The engine stirred again, a low growl vibrating through the floor. The cabin lights flickered, passengers straightened in their seats, hope rising. Yet Serena knew the turbulence ahead was not in the sky, but in the human heart. She rested her hand lightly on the silver case. For Lily, for truth, for the unraveling that would not be ignored. The engines groaned once more, a teasing rumble that promised flight, but faded back into silence. A wave of frustration rolled through the cabin. Passengers shifted in their seats, muttered curses, shook their heads at glowing screens that confirmed what they already knew. Flight 714 was no ordinary delay. It had become a spectacle. Dr. Serena Caldwell sat still, her hands folded in her lap. She could feel the weight of every glance that flicked toward her. Some were sympathetic, some hostile, some simply curious. She had learned to live with eyes that measured her worth before she even spoke. But here, in this capsule of recycled air and taut nerves, the scrutiny felt suffocating. Margaret Doyle emerged from the galley, her steps sharp, her lips pressed into a thin line. She approached Serena with a clipboard in hand, her voice clipped enough to cut the air. "Dr. Caldwell, this is your final warning. If you refuse to cooperate, I will have no choice but to escalate." Serena's eyes rose slowly, steady and calm. "Escalate to what? I am sitting in my assigned seat?" Quietly. "If that is disruption, perhaps the problem is not mine." Margaret's jaw tightened. Passengers nearby leaned closer, sensing the escalation. Isabella Cruz angled her phone subtly, capturing the exchange. Her audience swelled into the millions, their comments spilling across the screen faster than she could read. The man in 2B threw up his hands. "For God's sake, just move already. We are all prisoners, because you want to make some point." Before Serena could answer, a voice from further back rose. The young woman with braids who had spoken earlier leaned forward again, her voice clear. "No, she should not have to move. Why is it so hard to understand that others joined? Murmurs of agreement spreading." A man across the aisle added, "She paid for her seat. She belongs here as much as anyone else." The tension split the cabin. Some passengers clapped softly. Others groaned, shaking their heads. The air thickened with division, the hum of voices swelling like a storm inside a bottle. Captain Ethan Walker stepped out of the cockpit, drawn by the commotion. He raised his hand, his voice calm but firm. "That's enough. Everyone, please remain seated. We will resolve this without further disruption." He turned toward Serena. "Dr. Caldwell, may I speak with you privately near the galley?" Serena hesitated. Every instinct warned her that stepping away from her seat was dangerous. Yet she saw something different in the captain's eyes, something that hinted at sincerity. Slowly, she rose, her silver case tucked firmly under her arm. The cabin watched in silence as she walked with him to the galley. Margaret lingered nearby, her arms crossed, her glare unyielding. The captain spoke first, his voice low. "I want to be clear. I have no interest in humiliating you, but headquarters is breathing down my neck. They want resolution. They want control." Serena studied him, her tone measured. "Control is not the same as justice." He nodded slightly. "I know. Believe me. I know. But this situation is bigger than this flight now. The world is watching. My crew is splitting in half. Passengers are on edge. I need to understand what you want." Serena took a deep breath. She wanted many things: dignity, fairness, respect. But in this moment she wanted something simpler. "I want to be left alone to sit in the seat I paid for, to protect what I carry, and to arrive in New York in time to save a child's life. Nothing more, nothing less." Her words carried a weight the captain had not expected. He looked at the silver case, then back at her. "A child's life." "Yes," Serena said quietly. "Every minute we lose, her chances diminish." The captain's face shifted. The rigid line softened, replaced by the heavy understanding of a man who had carried responsibility before. "Why didn't you say that sooner?" Serena's voice steadied. because dignity should not require explanation, because my humanity should not depend on what I carry in this case. But if knowing the stakes makes you understand, then now you know." The captain exhaled, rubbing his forehead. For a moment, he looked older, burdened by the truth. Then he nodded. "You have my word. I will not allow you to be removed. Not on my flight." Margaret stiffened. "Captain, you cannot let her dictate terms." He turned sharply. "Enough. Margaret, this is my aircraft, and I will not tolerate passengers being treated as intruders because of your biases." The words struck like a thunderclap. Margaret's face flushed crimson, her mouth opening and closing without sound. She turned away, retreating down the aisle, her polished mask shattered. Serena felt a rush of relief, but it was fleeting. The battle was not over. She knew headquarters still loomed, still desperate to regain control. She returned to her seat, the silver case secure at her feet once more. Passengers whispered, some emboldened, others resentful. Isabella's stream captured it all. The comments a flood of support, outrage, and solidarity. Serena opened her journal again. Her hand moved quickly, words spilling like water breaking through a dam. Breaking points are dangerous. They can destroy, or they can rebuild. What matters is what comes after. Her chest tightened. She thought of Lily again, imagined the girl's fragile lungs fighting for air. She whispered under her breath, "Hold on, little one. I am coming." The engines roared suddenly, a deep vibration shaking the cabin. Passengers straightened, hope flickering in tired eyes. The intercom crackled with Captain Walker's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have been cleared for departure. Please fasten your seatbelts. We are leaving the gate." A cheer rippled through the cabin, relief flooding voices that had grown weary. Serena sat back, her hand resting on the case. She knew the journey ahead was still fragile. That turbulence waited not only in the sky, but in the halls of power. But for the first time that night, forward motion felt possible. The plane rolled slowly toward the runway, engines humming stronger, lights gleaming against the darkened tarmac. Serena closed her eyes and breathed deeply. Steadying herself, the breaking point had come. The unraveling had begun. And though the storm still raged, she knew one truth she had not moved, and she never would. The engines thundered with rising power as Flight 714 turned onto the runway. Passengers sat upright, some with relief etched on their faces, others still restless, their frustration not yet soothed by the promise of movement. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, the hum of anticipation settling into the air. "Doctor," Serena Caldwell placed a steady hand on the silver case at her feet. Grounding herself, she felt the vibration through the floor as the engine surged, pressing the aircraft forward with unstoppable force. The nose lifted, and gravity pressed her back into her seat as the plane rose, leaving San Diego and the long night of delays behind. For a moment, as the lights of the city fell away beneath them, Serena allowed herself a breath of relief. Forward motion, at last. Altitude, distance. Yet she knew the storm had not passed. It had only followed them higher into the sky. Across the aisle, Isabella Cruz whispered into her phone, her live stream still running. Her voice carried quiet urgency. "We're airborne, everyone. But this story isn't over. You saw it. You heard it. This is bigger than one flight. This is about power, dignity, and truth." The comments exploded across her screen, solidarity pouring in from every corner of the digital world. Serena did not look, but she felt the current surrounding her, carrying her story beyond the pressurized cabin. Margaret Doyle moved stiffly through the aisle. Her composure frayed, but not entirely gone. She offered drinks to passengers with a forced smile, avoiding Serena's row as though proximity itself burned. Yet every glance she cast toward 1A carried the weight of unspoken resentment. The man in 2B accepted a glass of whiskey with a sigh. He muttered again, but this time his voice was softer, more uncertain. "I didn't sign up for all this." His words carried less venom now, more weariness. He kept his eyes on the amber liquid swirling in his cup. Serena sat quietly, gazing out the window. The world stretched endless and dark, stars scattered like sparks on velvet. She touched her journal once more, opening to a blank page. Her pen moved slowly, her handwriting steady despite the turbulence of her thoughts. Altitude does not erase struggle. It only makes the view clearer. Her chest tightened as she thought again of Lily Hammond, somewhere far east. The little girl's chest rose and fell with fragile rhythm, her parents clinging to hope. The minutes mattered, Serena whispered silently, as though the child could hear her across the miles. "Hold on, little one. We're coming." Captain Ethan Walker's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are at cruising altitude. Estimated arrival in New York is 4 hours and 20 minutes. Thank you for your patience." His voice carried a steadiness that reassured passengers, but Serena heard the subtle strain beneath it. She knew he carried the weight of headquarters pressing against him even now. His decision to stand by her had not erased the airline's desperation. It had only delayed the confrontation. In Dallas, Jonathan Pierce stared at his reflection in the darkened glass of his office window. The city lights stretched below him, but he saw only the headlines glowing on his phone. Shareholders demanded his resignation. Hospitals demanded answers. Regulators threatened hearings. His empire was crumbling at a pace he could not control. He clenched his fists. She thinks she's won. She thinks silence makes her powerful. But she has underestimated what I can still do. His words were bitter, but even as he spoke them, doubt crept into his voice. Back on the plane, Serena leaned her head against the window. The soft vibration of the aircraft soothed her nerves, but inside, her heart wrestled with itself. Anger simmered, demanding release. Weariness pressed in, begging her to surrender. Yet beneath both burned the steady flame of resolve. She closed her eyes and heard her father's voice in memory, strong and calm. "Dignity is not a gift, Serena. It is a shield. Hold it steady, and it will carry you through storms." Her breathing slowed. The words anchored her, weaving strength into her bones. The cabin was quiet now, passengers lulled by altitude. But Isabella's live stream continued, her camera discreetly angled. She spoke with conviction. "Look at her. She is not shouting. She is not fighting. She is simply sitting in her seat, and the world is shaking because of it. Sometimes power looks like stillness. Sometimes resistance is as quiet as breathing." Her audience responded with fire. Messages of solidarity, donations to causes of justice, hashtags multiplying like sparks. The world outside the plane was alive with noise, yet inside, Serena remained still, her silence echoing louder than any shout. Margaret passed by again, her steps slower now. She paused briefly at Serena's row, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. She moved on, her mask slipping further, the certainty she once carried dissolving in the wake of truth. Serena opened her journal once more, writing words she knew she would carry long after this flight ended. Altitude does not hide injustice. It reveals who carries it with them. She set the pen down, her hand resting once more on the silver case. The hum of the engines filled her ears, steady as a heartbeat. She whispered a final thought into the quiet cabin. For Lily, for dignity, for truth. The plane sliced through the night sky, carrying not just passengers, but a story the world would not forget. And in seat 1A, Dr. Serena Caldwell sat still, her silence heavy with thunder. The night sky stretched endless, dotted with stars that glittered like distant promises. Flight 714 cut through the darkness with steady momentum, the engines humming a lullaby that calmed some passengers but left others restless. At 35,000 feet, silence should have been peaceful, but silence here was heavy, charged, waiting to snap. Dr. Serena Caldwell sat upright in 1A, her hand resting on the silver case at her feet. The weight of it grounded her, reminded her of Lily Hammond's fragile lungs waiting in New York. Every mile forward was a mile closer to hope, yet every mile also pulled her deeper into the storm she had ignited with a single gesture of refusal. Margaret Doyle moved down the aisle again, her cart rattling softly. She offered drinks with the precision of routine, but her eyes betrayed the turmoil beneath. She could feel the cabin watching her, feel the story slipping out of her control. Each time she passed Serena, the resentment in her glance grew sharper. At the back of the cabin, Isabella Cruz whispered into her phone, her live stream still alive. Millions were watching now, their comments pouring in faster than she could read. Some cheered Serena's composure. Others shared their own stories of humiliation. The plane had become more than a vessel crossing time zones. It was now a stage, a mirror, a battlefield. Captain Ethan Walker sat in the cockpit, his hands steady on the controls. But even as the autopilot guided them, his mind wrestled with messages flashing across his console. Headquarters demanded compliance. Legal teams demanded statements. Public relations begged for resolution. He had never flown through a storm like this one, where the turbulence came not from clouds, but from human pride. In Dallas, Jonathan Pierce leaned over a conference table, his voice sharp with desperation. We need to retake control. This cannot be dictated by one passenger. A legal advisor shook his head. Sir, she holds the power by contract, and now the public holds it as well. Forcing her out mid-flight would destroy us completely. Pierce's face hardened. Then we do not force her. We outmaneuver her. Get the FAA involved. Frame it as a security precaution. She will either comply or look unreasonable. Back on the plane, Margaret received a message on her device. She read it quickly, her eyes narrowing. Then she set the cart aside and strode toward 1A. She stopped at Serena's row, her tone clipped but falsely polite. Dr. Caldwell, Headquarters has requested I remind you that noncompliance with crew instructions can result in federal penalties. I advise you to move to a different seat to avoid escalation. The cabin hushed. Passengers leaned closer. Their curiosity piqued. Isabella's camera caught every word. Serena looked up slowly, her expression calm. I am in compliance. I am seated, my belt fastened, my belongings secured. Which instruction have I refused, other than the one rooted in your prejudice? Margaret flushed. This is not prejudice. This is procedure. Serena's voice remained soft, but her words carried steel. Procedure that applies only to me is not procedure. It is persecution. A murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin. The young woman with braids nodded vigorously. She's right. We all see it. Margaret's composure faltered. She opened her mouth, but Captain Walker emerged from the cockpit before she could respond. His face was stern, his voice firm. "Margaret, that's enough. Return to your station." Her lips tightened. "Captain, with all due respect." "No." He cut her off. "With all due respect, you are jeopardizing this flight. Sit down." The authority in his tone silenced her. She turned sharply, retreating to the galley. Serena exhaled slowly, her pulse steady despite the storm around her. She opened her journal, her pen moving across the page. Power unmasked is not strength. True power is restraint in the face of injustice. The engines roared louder as the plane hit a patch of turbulence. The cabin shook. Drinks rippled in their cups. Passengers gasped. The seatbelt sign blinked on. For a moment, everyone forgot the tension, focusing instead on the sway of the aircraft. Serena gripped the armrest, steadying herself. The turbulence passed quickly, but the symbolism lingered. She thought to herself, "This is what happens when pride collides with truth. The air itself trembles." Her phone buzzed again. A secure message from her operations director appeared. "Pierce is reaching out to the FAA. He is desperate. Hold firm." She closed her eyes, exhaustion creeping in. The weight of endurance pressed against her bones. She longed for rest, but rest was a luxury denied to those who carried dignity like armor. The man in 2B spoke again, his tone softer now. "Listen, I didn't understand at first. I thought you were just making trouble. But I see it now. You're not the problem. You're the reason this flight means something." Serena turned her head, meeting his eyes. She offered a small nod. No words needed. Sometimes understanding was enough. At the back, Isabella spoke to her audience. "Do you see what just happened?" She didn't have to raise her voice. She didn't have to fight. She just told the truth, and the truth is shaking this airline to its core. Her viewers responded with fire. Hashtags surged. Donations to social justice groups spiked. Solidarity spread like wildfire. The world was not only watching, the world was moving. Jonathan Pierce watched it unfold on screens in his boardroom. His empire, once polished and untouchable, was unraveling with every passing second. He slammed his fist against the table. She thinks silence makes her invincible, but silence can be broken. I will break it. But deep inside, he knew the truth. Silence was not weakness. Silence was thunder, and thunder always arrived before the storm. On the plane, Serena leaned back into her seat. She rested her hand once more on the silver case. Her eyes closed briefly, and she whispered a prayer. For Lily, for truth, for the storm that will change everything. The plane surged forward into the night sky, turbulence behind and turbulence ahead, and in seat 1A, dignity sat unshaken, a beacon against the darkness. The hum of the engines softened as Captain Ethan Walker adjusted the altitude. Outside, the black canvas of night gave way to faint streaks of gray. Dawn was still far off, but hints of light traced the horizon as Flight 714 cut eastward. The cabin was quieter now, though the quiet carried its own strain. Passengers sat heavy in their seats, restless but subdued, as though they sensed the gravity of what this flight had become. Some whispered. Others scrolled endlessly through updates about the viral storm brewing below. But all eyes still found their way, again and again, to 1A. Dr. Serena Caldwell remained poised. She had not moved, not once, since the moment she stepped aboard. The silver case rested firmly beneath her, untouched by anyone but her. She glanced down at it often, a steady reminder of why this fight mattered, not only for dignity, but for life itself. Her phone vibrated once more. She lifted it discreetly. The message brief. Pierce is cornered. FAA notified. They may attempt to intervene at landing. Prepare. She exhaled slowly, sliding the phone back into her pocket. Her fingers brushed the cover of her journal, the words inside like anchors holding her steady. She opened to the page she had last written. Power unmasked is not strength. True power is restraint in the face of injustice. She traced the ink with her fingertip, her lips moving silently. Margaret Doyle emerged once again from the galley. Her composure was frayed, her uniform slightly rumpled, her eyes shadowed by fatigue, but her determination had not broken. She walked with stiff shoulders toward Serena's row, pausing at 1A. Dr. Caldwell, she began, her voice tight but loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Upon landing, you will be escorted for questioning. For everyone's safety, please prepare to disembark under direction. A collective murmur rose in the cabin. Some passengers looked alarmed, others outraged. Isabella Cruz tilted her phone, ensuring the moment streamed live. Serena lifted her gaze. Her eyes met Margaret's, calm and unyielding, questioning for what crime Margaret hesitated. Noncompliance, disruption, possible security violation. Serena's lips curved slightly, not into a smile, but into something sharper. So now sitting in silence has become a crime. Her words hung in the air. The man in 2B shook his head, muttering under his breath. This is madness. The young woman with braids spoke up again, louder this time. We all saw it. She did nothing wrong. If they treat her like a criminal, they treat us all like suspects. Isabella's audience exploded online, their comments scrolling like wildfire. She is being punished for existing. This cannot stand. We are all 1A tonight. Margaret's face flushed, but she pressed on. These are procedures, ma'am. Please cooperate. Serena's voice softened, though every word cut clean. I have cooperated. I sat where my ticket placed me. I followed every instruction but the one that asked me to surrender my dignity. That is not noncompliance. That is humanity. The cabin erupted in murmurs again. Some clapped quietly. Others raised their phones higher. Margaret's composure cracked further. She turned abruptly and strode back toward the galley, her footsteps sharp against the carpet. Captain Walker stepped into the cabin moments later. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed the storm behind them. Ladies and gentlemen, as we approach New York, I ask for your patience. There will be officials on the ground. Please remain seated after landing until we receive clearance. His gaze lingered on Serena. She met his eyes, searching. He gave a faint nod, almost imperceptible, but enough. She understood. He was with her, even as the walls of authority pressed tighter. At headquarters, Jonathan Pierce barked into a phone. His tie loosened, his face pale. I want her escorted immediately. Make it look professional, not hostile. We spin it as a standard protocol. Nothing more. Do you understand? But his words could not silence the tide. Outside his office windows, protesters were already gathering, spurred by Isabella's stream and the viral movement it unleashed. Chants echoed through the streets. Signs rose into the night. His empire was no longer cracking. It was collapsing. On the plane, Serena opened her journal again. Her pen moved across the page. Descent is not only of altitude, but of masks, of facades, of power stripped bare. Judgment is not theirs alone. Judgment belongs to truth. She closed the book, her hand trembling slightly. The weight of fatigue pressed against her bones, But her resolve burned steady. She thought of Lily Hammond, of the hospital lights in New York, of parents holding hope like a fragile flame. She whispered to herself, "I will not fail you." The seatbelt sign chimed. The plane tilted gently as it began its descent. Passengers straightened, fastening belts, tucking belongings. The city lights of New York glittered in the distance, sprawling like a galaxy across the earth. Serena leaned her forehead briefly against the window, the cool glass calming her skin. The view was breathtaking, but her thoughts were heavy. She braced for what waited on the ground, for the confrontation that would test not only her dignity, but the truth itself. Isabella's voice carried softly from behind. "We are descending now. They may try to silence her, but the world has already heard. This story will not be buried." Her audience surged again, a tide of solidarity echoing across continents. Serena did not watch, but she felt it. The noise of millions now traveled with her, a chorus she had never asked for but could not refuse. As the plane lowered through the clouds, turbulence shook the cabin lightly. Drinks rattled, passengers gripped armrests. Serena sat still, her hand resting on the silver case, her eyes fixed ahead. She whispered once more, steady as a prayer, for Lily, for truth, for all of us. The wheels prepared to touch ground. The descent was almost over, but judgment was only beginning. The landing gear extended with a deep mechanical groan, vibrating through the cabin as Flight 714 descended into the lights of New York. Passengers braced themselves, hands tightening around armrests, eyes fixed on the city glittering below. The long night was ending, but the real reckoning was only beginning. The wheels struck the runway with a jolt, the aircraft bouncing once before settling into a steady roll. A ripple of relief spread through the cabin as the engines roared in reverse, slowing them down. They had arrived. "Doctor?" Serena Caldwell kept her gaze forward, her hand resting firmly on the silver case. She felt every vibration as the plane slowed, every heartbeat pounding against her ribs. Her mind was with Lily Hammond now, the little girl whose fragile life depended on this journey. The thought gave her strength, even as she braced for what awaited at the gate. Captain Ethan Walker's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York. For the time being, please remain seated with your seat belts fastened until further notice." The announcement was routine, but the tension in his tone was not. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, aware this arrival was not like any other. Serena lifted her eyes and saw them flashes of uniforms waiting through the windows, silhouettes lined up near the jet bridge, federal agents, airline officials, cameras. The world had gathered at this gate. Margaret Doyle emerged from the galley, her face pale but her posture rigid. She moved down the aisle briskly, her voice carrying a forced authority. "Remain seated. Officials will board momentarily." Isabella Cruz adjusted her phone, whispering into her live stream. "They are here. Watch closely. Every second counts. This is not the end. It is the moment of truth." Serena's chest tightened, but her face betrayed nothing. She sat tall, her hand still on the case. She whispered to herself, steady as stone, "I will not move." The jet bridge connected. The cabin door opened with a hiss. Uniformed officials stepped aboard, their presence heavy, eyes scanning until they landed on Serena in 1A. One of them, a tall man with silver hair, spoke firmly. "Dr. Caldwell, please come with us for questioning." The cabin erupted in murmurs. Some passengers gasped. Others shouted protests. The young woman with braids called out. She did nothing wrong. Others clapped, their voices rising. "Leave her alone." Serena remained seated, her gaze steady. On what grounds? The agent hesitated, his eyes flicking toward Margaret, then back to Serena. His voice faltered. Non-compliance with crew instructions. Her lips curved faintly. Silence is not non-compliance. Stillness is not disruption. And dignity is not a crime. The passengers clapped louder this time, voices rising into a chorus. Isabella's live stream caught every word, her audience swelling into millions. Hashtags exploded. Solidarity surged, the internet roaring louder than any intercom. Captain Walker stepped out of the cockpit, his uniform crisp, his voice commanding. That's enough. Dr. Caldwell has broken no laws. She is a paying passenger in her assigned seat, and she carries something vital for a child waiting in New York. If you stop her, you stop that child's chance at life. The agent froze. Cameras flashed through the windows. The world was watching, and every hesitation, every word, was already history. Margaret's voice broke through, sharp with desperation. Captain, you cannot undermine protocol. He turned on her, his voice steady but cutting. Protocol does not excuse prejudice. This ends here. Margaret's mouth opened, but no words came. She looked around, her authority gone, her mask shattered under the weight of truth. She retreated to the galley, her steps quick, her composure broken. The agent shifted uncomfortably, then stepped back. Very well, Dr. Caldwell. You are free to disembark. A cheer erupted through the cabin, passengers clapping, some standing despite the seatbelt sign. Phones filmed from every angle, the sound of solidarity echoing in the confined space. Serena rose slowly, her silver case secure in her grasp. She turned briefly, as her eyes sweeping the cabin. Thank you, she said softly, her voice carrying despite its quietness. Not just for me, for what is right. Her words drew another round of applause. Some passengers wept openly, others raised fists in solidarity. Isabella's voice cracked with emotion as she spoke into her phone. You saw it. You all saw it. Dignity stood still, and the world moved with her. Serena walked calmly down the aisle, every step deliberate, every breath steady. The officials parted as she approached the exit. She stepped through the cabin door and onto the jet bridge, the roar of reporters and cameras waiting just beyond. Outside, the terminal swelled with people, protesters, supporters, journalists, signs lifted high. We are all 1A. Dignity is not optional. Justice on board. Jonathan Pierce watched it unfold on a screen in his office miles away, his empire collapsing in real time. He whispered bitterly, She won. But even as he said it, he knew it was not about winning or losing. It was about truth breaking free. Serena moved through the crowd, shielded by officials now acting more like escorts than enforcers. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed. But she kept her eyes forward, her focus sharp. She stepped into a waiting car, the silver case never leaving her grip. As the car pulled away, she leaned back briefly, exhaustion washing over her. She closed her eyes and whispered, For Lily. Hours later, in a hospital room bathed in sterile light, surgeons prepared. Lily Hammond's parents clutched each other, tears streaming down their faces as the case was opened. The precious tissue inside would give their daughter a chance at life. Back in her hotel room, Serena finally allowed herself to breathe. She opened her journal and wrote the final words of the night. Truth does not land softly. It lands with weight. And once it touches ground, it cannot be contained. She closed the journal, set it beside her, and gazed out at the city lights. Somewhere beyond the skyline, a child's life had been given back its fragile rhythm. Somewhere across the world, millions had found courage in her stillness. She whispered one last thought into the quiet room. I did not move, and because of that, the world did. And so, the plane landed, but what touched down was far more than wheels on a runway. It was truth. It was dignity. It was a reminder that silence, when anchored in courage, can roar louder than any voice. Dr. Serena Caldwell never moved, and because of that, a child was given a chance at life, and a world was forced to confront the shadows of prejudice still lingering among us. What happened aboard Flight 714 was not just about a seat. It was about whether we allow discrimination to remain hidden in plain sight, or whether we stand quietly, firmly, together for what is right. Serena's strength, her stillness, has left us with a choice to remain bystanders, or to carry that dignity forward in our own lives. As we close this story, let it not be an ending, but a beginning. Let it stir in you the same courage Serena showed, so that respect, justice, and humanity become more than words. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Join us for the next journey as we continue to bring stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us of the power of dignity.